Well, hello there. It's that time of the week again when we welcome you back to the world of archive television. Now, the word archive, I guess, suggests a dusty vault, but we're going to clean things up a bit here today. So many TV programmes, you know, are lost forever. Perhaps you may have one in your attic. www.lostshows.com may give you the answer. It's worth a check at some stage. But not before we've met our first guest tonight, which is Mark Ward. Thank you for coming in to see us, Mark.
Thank you.
From Birmingham?
From Birmingham, yes.
Good. Now, you're a writer. Tell us a little bit more first of all what you do.
Well, I've written two books on old television programmes. The first one was Out of the Unknown for Kaleidoscope Publishing, and later I wrote a book on Till Death Us Do Part, the famous 60s and 70s comedy. Right. And I did a lot of research, and it's been a very enjoyable experience. Yeah.
Tell us about the first one then.
The first one, Out of the Unknown, was an anthology series. They were very popular in the 60s. It was basically a series of individual plays each week with an umbrella theme or title. And it was the idea of a lady called Irene Shubik. She was she loved science fiction, literary science fiction, and she loved the power it had as a parable for contemporary life. And she wanted to make a series of adult science fiction adaptations of literary works. Works by people such as Isaac Asimov, Clifford Simak, John Wyndham. And it started in 1965. And she worked on 3 series, and when she left, the fourth series changed in 1971 and became a kind of psychological suspense anthology. And much of all 4 series has been wiped, and so it's of interest to archivists and so
on. Who made it?
It was on BBC Two, and it was in conjunction with Sidney Newman, the head of drama at BBC, who of course created Doctor Who, helped create Doctor Who. And it was very popular, and moved into colour in the last 2 series, along with BBC Two.
So, you obviously love this show.
Yes.
How much of it does exist?
Most of the first series, so you have 10 out of 12 episodes of that, and then 4 episodes from the second, and literally only 1 complete episode from the third, and about half of the last series. And like most products in the BBC archives, they were wiped to make room for other programmes later.
Staggering to think, isn't it?
Because it was expensive to store and to buy these tapes, and they had to record programmes over them, really.
So why the fascination for you? I mean, to the degree that you wrote about it.
I remember reading about it in the local press when I was a child, and my mother and father were interested in science fiction, and in 1967 they showed 6 of them on BBC One. I couldn't get BBC Two then. And I remember staying up and watching them, thinking they were quite the most wonderful things I'd ever seen. I'd always loved science fiction. And it started from there, really, and then I visited the BBC Written Archives Centre and got some screenplays and some notes and so on, and wrote a book for Kaleidoscope. The profits from it go to charity, for the Lifeboat charity, and I thought that was a really good charity too.
Any well-known actors who are in it?
There are a lot of good actors in there, staples of British television, really. You'd have people like Anthony Bates and various other people who you may not know them, but you know them. Michelle Destrees was in another episode, and some very good old film actors such as Ronald Lewis, Terence Morgan, and so on. It was a very high quality show. The best script writers, the best works to be adapted, and so on. So it's a quality show.
And I understand that you launched your book with a showing of a missing episode.
Yes, purely by chance. A private collector had discovered an episode called Tunnel Under the World, which is a marvellous, wonderful episode, a satire on consumerism and consumer culture. And yes, that was found and literally launched at the Kaleidoscope project for the book. Certain other episodes have been found in the past 10 years or so. One was found from German TV. Another was found on the back of a tape in the BBC. It's not a complete episode, but half an hour of it. And it was simply while they were digitising the tape, they found half an episode of Out of the Unknown. So it's purely by chance, and purely because of other archives and by private collectors.
Is there a particular one you'd love to get your hands on but you haven't seen since it first went out?
Get Off My Cloud, the final episode of Series 3, which is a very surreal episode about trying to rescue a science fiction writer from his madness by injecting the most stable person's mind they can find into it. And it's got people like the Daleks. It's got the Daleks in it and so on. And it would have the key things for Out of the Unknown, the wonderful sets, very spectacular sets. It's a comedy as well, and it's got Peter Jeffrey and Peter Barkworth, who are two of the greatest actors on TV. And I'd love to see that one. But any of them, I'd love to see. It really would be good.
Tell me about when I was a student in Birmingham, Peter Barkworth came to do some filming at the university in Birmingham at the time.
Yes.
What a charming man.
He was
nice.
a superb actor, very understated, but always quality. And he could appear in so many things, dramas like Telford's Change, and series such as the Avengers and Doctor Who and programmes like that. And Peter Jeffrey, very similar as well.
Is what is remaining of the show available on DVD generally now?
It was released by the BFI last year, which completely shows all the remaining episodes. Some of them survive as audio reconstructions because fans like me, older fans than me in the 60s, would tape them with a microphone at the TV, and they've been cleared up and brilliantly adapted for a DVD. And you also have commentaries and so on. It's a perfect package for Out of the Unknown. It's very, very good.
What sometimes I know happens in other people we've spoken to is that little clips of the programmes exist, though the rest of it might not be, for like promos and things like that. Is that the case with this show?
That's certainly the case. Two of the famous Isaac Asimov clips from programmes which no longer exist, they survived in 60s documentaries, and that's the only way we can actually see them. One of them's called, Wendy Craig, Satisfaction Guaranteed, and the other one has got star cast in it called Liar, and both of them superb episodes, but there's only 1 or 2 minutes left because they survived in the documentary.
Claire, while I'm away, we'd like you to take charge of TN3.
TN3 is a robot.
A robot? Here with me?
It's our new domestic model.
Oh, no.
There's nothing to be afraid of. It can't possibly harm you.
No.
And it's fully programmed. You don't even have to press a button.
Oh, but why here? Can't you leave it somewhere else?
No, I'm afraid not. You see, well, what we're doing isn't quite legal.
What do you think the magic was of anthologies? The one that springs to mind for me, one of my favourite 60s shows, it's American, The Twilight Zone, Rod Serling.
Yes.
And that was always, very, very tightly written, compact stories every week.
Yes.
Totally gripping, drew you in right away. We rarely see anything like an anthology series these days.
Yes, we hardly ever see them. We used to see them quite a lot in the 60s and early 70s. I think it may be expense, it may be that people now plan for event television. They can project a 3-episode series rather than a series with individual stories that you have to adjust to.
So you've got to have different sets,
different
as well,
sets, different directors, different cast. Irene Shubik always had the problem of good adaptations of stories. You can have wonderful science fiction stories on the page, but will they translate to the screen, particularly the small screen, particularly with the budget of £6,000, which was nothing in those days. So she always had that problem as well.
Do all the scripts exist?
Most of them, I never traced the script for Get Off My Cloud, so I had to use press releases and various other things to do that. But most of the scripts survive.
Do you think they could be remade, or were they of their time?
I think that can very easily be remade. Some of them are very pertinent to today. Walk's End, which is one of the missing ones, is a superb comment on old age. It's various old people in a home. They suspect the proprietor to be doing something really awful to them, and the twist in the end is that actually he's not. He's actually given them more longevity, but the way the programme is written, that's a curse, because they are senile or they just don't know where they are and so on. And I think that's very pertinent for today. The Machine Stops was an attack on technology, sucking all the energy out of man, when it was written in 1909, which is as a response to H.G. Wells. And that is very pertinent because we now have the internet and Twitter and so on. I think a lot of them can be adapted for them, most of them. And you could still use those fantastic sets and so on that characterise the 60s.
Was it made at Television Centre or elsewhere?
Yes, it was mainly, and Lime Grove, I think, as well.
Right, oh, those programs.
The classic days. And as usual in the 60s, you had film inserts as well, which, of course, one or two of them have survived, as one from Random Quest, whereas, again, the programme's been erased.
It's funny to think, isn't it? Some people would be surprised to hear that you couldn't get BBC Two. But in those days, there were two different systems, the 405 line system VHF and 625 UHF.
Yes.
And BBC Two was only on the UHF. So I had to have a dual TV or a different type
and
of
it was quite expensive to have. And it was such a boon to watch Out of the Unknown, at least the third series, when we got BBC Two. Nobody had colour in those days, only a handful of people. And it was just amazing to watch it as a 9-year-old to see it. And it's just so tragic that most of that season has been wiped.
When you did see it in colour, the rare colour episodes, did it have a different feel to it then? I mean, some say some things are better in black and white when it comes to suspense and sci-fi.
It would be interesting to see that, but as we say with the third series, much of it doesn't exist. If it's quality TV, it will shine through black and white as well as in colour, I think, and particularly the sets and so on. They look just as wonderful either way for me. And that's some brilliant directors on it, such as Alan Cook, Rudolph Cartier. They even had J.B. Priestley adapt one of the stories, and it's just amazing the quality of people involved, which might not be so easier to obtain now, logistically, apart from anything else.
It's remarkable. You think these big names they were writing on mainstream television, really, isn't it?
Yes. It's a tribute to Irene Shubik, really, because she not only story edited the first 3 series, but she also produced it as well. And she also produced another series called 13 Against Fate simultaneously. She must have wore herself out doing all this. But she personally met Asimov and John W. Campbell, the person who printed a lot of science fiction in America. She worked really hard for it. And eventually, one of the shows, The Machine Stops, won a big prize at the Fantasy Film Festival in Trieste in 1967, a festival that's still going on apparently. And it's a tribute to one woman really for all this.
At a time when it was less easy for women.
Very much a
writers
man's
and
world.
producers to
And
get on, absolutely.
you can compare her to Verity Lambert with Doctor Who, a woman on her own who knew exactly what she wanted, a charm and tact, and as well as drive, and she could get all these people together and make something so wonderful out of it.
Well, Mark, listen, I want you to come back on the show and talk to us about Till Death Us Do Part at
Okay,
some stage.
thank
That would be
you.
really, really good because we've got masses yet to discuss. But for
Okay,
now,
thank you
very
very
much for your time today.
Thank you.
Hello again, welcome back to the Long Lost Show here on Big Centre TV. Now, we were talking in the first half about some shows from the 1960s. The name Sidney Newman was mentioned, and he's certainly going to crop up again in our debate tonight. We're joined by Robert McLaughlin from Birmingham City University again, and Chris Perry from Kaleidoscope, the TV preservation group. And I mentioned Sidney Newman because we're going to talk about Armchair Theatre. Some would say iconic series from the 1960s, ABC television. For anyone who doesn't know about it, Chris, it's close to your heart, I know.
It is. I think out of all the TV series over the years that have kind of engaged my interest, Armchair Theatre is probably one of the most fundamental in that sense of the word. I mean, it ran from 1956 until roughly 1974, which is a phenomenal length of time to run. And at some point, it was running almost 30 weeks a year, doing different live plays, which I think is an incredible output. And if you think back at some of the great kind of playwrights who worked kind of in the 50s and 60s, they worked on Armchair Theatre. But for me, it's a bit more personal because the very first archive that Kaleidoscope ever really went into was what had been the ABC archive. And I remember going in there. We went in originally because we were going to just transfer some material for an event. And the archive, the boss, if you like, John Heron, down at Pinewood, said, we've just had a whole vault of film come back from Film Bond. It needs a bit of cataloguing. Would you mind having a look at it? You know, so I wandered into this vault with no real expectations of good or bad, and I realised very quickly there was a lot of Armchair Theatre in there, and I didn't know if they were missing or not. So I spent a whole summer driving backwards and forwards, from Birmingham down to Pinewood Film Studios, trying to catalogue all these cans, and soon came to realise there was a lot of unique Armchair Theatres in there, including a Noel Coward play and a Jack Rosenthal play and all sorts of things. So when I would kind of wander into his office at the end of the day and put this film can on the desk and say, that's the only copy you've got of that one, that was missing before, it made it really quite special to me, the series Armchair Theatre.
What was one of the ones you found there?
Well, Compensation Alice was one of them, which was the Jack Rosenthal play. Right. I can't remember the name of the Noel Coward one now. It'll come back to me as we kind of sit here.
Well, I was given a DVD at Christmas, actually, which because there's a number of them available now, and this was, I think it was disc 3, but it was from quite early on, and there was one on there by J.B. Priestley. I mean, extraordinary.
Yeah. It's amazing to think about. That's a show that had, I assume most playwrights cut their teeth on something like this. The big writers of the 70s and 80s produced things that was an hour long of technically live TV as well. There was something that was produced for such a long time.
That's a fascinating example. I think that's Now Let Him Go you're thinking of, the J.B. Priestley play, and that was at the BFI. They had that on film, but the ABC copyright holders, Lumiere, didn't have it. That was one of the film prints I found that existed elsewhere but didn't exist there, and I gave it back to them, and that's the film print they used for that transfer. So it kind of shows that if you do find things, it does get used years down the line by DVD companies and does get repeated, which is quite brilliant, really. What I was amazed by was when I learnt many years later the BFI had actually got some untransmitted Armchair Theatres, including some on videotape still, and that amazed me that some had been banned back in the 60s for their kind of controversial content, and had survived on videotape, but because they were banned, because in those days, because of the tax advantages of TV, if you didn't transmit it and you kept it, you kept the tax breaks. So it was cheaper to keep the untransmitted banned stuff than it was to actually kind of keep the stuff that had been shown.
So who would have banned it then? The ITA?
ITA.
For being
absolutely. I can't remember what it was now. I mean, one of them is called, is it 3 on a Gas Ring, I think it is.
Because I know that a lot of them were very kind of kitchen sinky. Maybe it's because it was a bit too extreme, a bit too kind of close to home? Is that really why they were banned?
Well, that's one of the things that's always puzzled me about Armchair Theatre. I mean, it's always called the founding place of kitchen sink drama, where you've got Alan Owen and people like that in it. But I don't know whether it really is. If you actually look at the whole run of it over 25 years, the amount of what I would call kitchen sink dramas is probably on one hand.
Yeah.
It was a series that did sci-fi, it did comedy. You know, people like David Nobbs cut their teeth on writing for it. It did thrillers. You know, the pilot for Callan came out of Armchair Theatre. And you kind of look at this sometimes and you think, there was probably only a tiny period of time around 1960 to 61 when probably kitchen sink was the right term. So I've often wondered kind of how much people actually know about the series who are actually then, you know, writing about it later, academics.
There's been articles at BFI saying the fact that it was just kitchen sinks. So if you go back and look at some of the academic papers that have written on this, they actually did say that is it another kitchen sink? What's it about? What's his story arc? What's the situation, the scenario? And it just seemed that a lot of the people who were producing this show knew it wasn't, but I think a lot of people who were watching it just assumed and it's kind of typecast that as a certain style, really.
Well, one that comes to my mind from the kitchen sink style is Lena Oh My Lena with Billy Whitelaw. Now that was made at Didsbury and went out live, obviously up in Manchester, and it's notable because there's this wonderful bit in it. You see a camera in the background, but you see a rigger pulling the camera cable around in the back of the shot, and the acting is going on in the foreground, and that's, you know, from someone who's fascinated by television, that's quite entertaining. But also, do you think it makes me think that perhaps was it the northern ones produced in the north that had that feel? Because presumably some were done at ABC Studios in Teddington in London as well. Were they all done were any done in the Midlands?
None of them ever made the Midlands. I mean, obviously I never knew Sidney Newman because he passed away some years before, but Leonard White has been a friend of mine for many, many years. In fact, he's still alive. I think he's 98 now, so he's still has all these original scripts and photographs and all the rest of it. And I mean, his intention was never to make it kitchen sink in that kind of generic way. He wanted the variety because he knew the audiences would get bored of watching the same thing every single week. And so he would, if he was sitting on the sofa here now, he'd vigorously say that was never the intention. I think Sidney Newman was slightly different. I mean, when it started under Dennis Vance, that was almost a kind of slightly historical period feel to it because he was quite into the theatricality of making theatre. So that's where you had things like J.B. Priestley writing for it because he'd come from that theatre background, and he said to them, you know, I want some period dramas, I want some things set in 17th century France and things like that. And so you had that kind of, and that was all live, but that was from Didsbury. But when Len decided to bring it down to Teddington, he definitely did not want it to have that feel. But in between, you had the Sidney Newman probably year or two in 60, 61. And that was where the kitchen sink was most prevalent. I think Sidney Newman was really interested by that idea of kind of gritty northern or southern, you know, realistic drama of working class people.
Well, you mentioned something that was really interesting, the idea it went out live. And you said about the fact that it had such sort of theatrical roots to it, the idea that you more than likely had theatre playwrights and the theatre actors in it. So to do it live and rehearse to get it live on stage must have suited that show perfectly. The actual production of that must have been absolutely amazing to have it.
And I think what's interesting about in those very early kind of editions where you had George Moore O'Farrell directing it and producing it as well and writing it in some cases. I mean, he's much more well known from Anglia for doing period dramas there. Again, that, you know, it was the kind of perceived view, I think, at the time to adapt, you know, in the late 50s, to adapt a lot more, you know, kind of stage plays
and theatre,
short stories and things. But if you look at the actual writers of all of Armchair Theatre, if you wrote them all out in a big list, you know, Rod Serling wrote for them, the guy who did The Twilight Zone.
Wow.
You know, Len Dayton wrote one for them, the thriller writer. John le Carré wrote one for them in the 70s. You know, I mean, James Mitchell did several thrillers for them. Jack Rosenthal, who was you know, known for all sorts of other things. An awful lot of writers who you wouldn't normally associate with kitchen sink drama worked on Armchair Theatre, and yet they're often kind of completely forgotten. Everyone talks about Alan Owen working on it, you know, as if like, and Howell Pinter, because he only did one. Howell Pinter did, you know. There were other people. I said David Nobbs, you know, worked on it. So it is quite fascinating how that history has misremembered some things because it suited. It's partly because it suits academics. It's partly because they couldn't see it before. The DVD releases now, if you buy them, you'll realise the range of Armchair Theatre is much bigger than you thought it was.
How does it stand up against the Wednesday play on the BBC?
I must admit, I didn't know anything about those at all. I've got no real comparison to it.
I think they sound better, to be honest. I mean, I guess I've always been more of an ITV junkie, so I'm kind of a bit... Sorry, BBC. But no, I mean, the Wednesday play did some great stuff with people like Dennis Potter as well. But I have to say that on balance, I did kind of feel they were trying to be too worthy, the Wednesday plays at times, too arty for their own good. Whereas I felt that, particularly under Armchair Theatre, it was much more down to earth and much more just fluid. I mean, it's worth remembering, out of all the editions that actually feel like won an award, only one Armchair Theatre ever won an award, an Emmy, in 1968 for Call Me Daddy, and that was nothing to do with kitchen sink dramas at all.
Interesting, it was an Emmy as well.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. In America, not over here.
Did the Wednesday play get...
I don't know.
Doesn't the
Any viewers know that question? I don't know if any of your viewers know that
want to know.
question.
I think one of the most notorious or well-known elements about the show is the fact that somebody did pass away on live or on TV, which is kind of a strange. How do you go about when your actors ceases to be there? It's a bit of a Tommy Cooper moment in many ways, I expect.
It was a play called Underground in 1958, I think it was, and I remember Verity Lambert telling me when she was alive that it was probably the scariest moment of her life as the PA, because there she was on the floor, kind of directing for the director, and they suddenly realised this guy had died. And so she was trying at one point to try and get the kind of an ambulance in and a doctor in, just to see if he was dead and could be revived. Without any sound, whilst in the other corner, that the writer, because in those days the writer would sit in the gallery and watch it go out live, the writer was rewriting it and passing it to the director, saying, "We'll change the scene and cut him out of here, and we'll put this in and that set over there." And they were literally making it as they went along, while someone was on the phone at the network saying, "You might have to pull this at any point. It might have to suddenly get pulled." So all the continuity people were kind of running around thinking, "What are we going to fill 20 minutes with?"
Goodness me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's probably the most. Well, I mean, it's worse than the kind of John Stonehouse incident on Central Weekend when he had a heart attack. It's far worse than that, because that was kind of debate show. They could just cut away from him.
That's right.
All the paramedics worked on him.
I remember that night. Well, listen, both, thank you ever so much. That was great to chat and remember a classic show there, and I'm glad that you helped to bring them back. That's lovely. Thank you very much indeed. We're back after a short break when we'll be interviewing Mike Sharland. He's a writer and writer's agent, has a fascinating career to tell us about, including having worked with Groucho Marx, no less. We're back after the break. Hello again, welcome back to the Long Lost Shows show on Big Centre TV. Now, we were talking, amongst other things in our debate, about programmes from the 1960s. I'm sure we might well touch on one or two of those again now with our next guest tonight, who is Mike Sharland, a theatrical agent now, but you started life as a writer, Mike. Tell me why and how you got into it.
How? Well, I got into it because my parents they were actors and they were touring. And I went to a school every fortnight, and I used to get beaten up fairly regularly. So I decided the best way forward was to just entertain people.
Right.
So I took the comedy role, and that began my writing, actually, which then went on. And when I'd left school, I sent some jokes to Dick Emery.
Oh, yes.
And Dick did them, and it encouraged me, and then I just thought, that's really what I want to do. And that's what I did.
Was he doing them on TV then?
He was doing them on TV, and he was also working at the London Palladium at the time.
Brilliant.
And that led to working with Stanley Baxter, where I met my writing partner for a while, Ken Hall. I also, before I met Ken, I had worked with Groucho Marx, which is one of the Marx brothers, the American Marx brothers.
These are three huge names in less than a minute,
I'm
actually.
sorry about that.
I want to touch on all of them, really. But Groucho Marx first. I mean, that is a legend from the Marx brothers. I mean, huge international stars from the 30s onwards, really.
Yes, I mean, they were amazing. What they used to do was they would, for their films, they would take the script and they would tour it on stage. So they knew exactly where the laughs were by the time they actually came to actually make the film.
Clever.
And I was recommended for the job, and he quite liked me because I wrote quite good gags for him.
Was this in the UK or in the US?
Yeah, we did 13 shows in the UK, then we did some in America, yeah.
Wow.
But
Which company made those then?
It would have been Rediffusion,
Wow.
Associated Rediffusion.
Yes.
Well, at least that's where it was based, anyway.
That's amazing. And was he difficult to work with?
No, I mean, you didn't see that much of him. I mean, he came on, did the show, did the jokes, and went. He did take some of us out to lunch at Simpsons in the Strand quite early on, and he said, after this huge meal, he said, I hope you guys have enjoyed it. And we said, yes, Mr. Marks, we have. And he said, good, I hope you can pay for it, and left. And it left three of us scrabbling around to actually pay for this.
You kind of got to laugh at that now.
Well, yeah, it wasn't so funny then.
But you've set the bar high with these characters. Let's talk again now about Stanley Baxter then. I mean, his was event TV in many ways.
Oh, very much so,
at the
yeah.
height of his career, the big specials on LWT. But of course, I mean, he was performing for many years before that.
He was indeed.
How difficult a person was he to write for?
Not difficult at all. I mean, very exacting. And when you hear people are difficult, I mean, some people are stupid, but the difficult ones quite often are exacting and they want to get something right. And I have every sort of sympathy for that, so it's never bothered me.
Yeah. Tell us about your writing partner then. I mean, how difficult is it to write with a partner? I keep asking questions about how difficult things are. Perhaps you'll tell me it was easy. But how do you come together, meeting of minds, to make that work?
Well, we both arrived at a line, and it was by line that we both agreed on. But of course, writing with a partner is the most glorious fun because we played all the parts and we played it far better than the actors, we thought. Gave us an excuse. And generally, what we used to write was little farces because we worked out that with television, if we went to commercial TV, which we did eventually from the BBC, we would need to have something that would hook an audience, hold it over the break, and come back. And so we wrote little farces, and they worked very well.
So how did you hold them over the break? You just leave them on a...
Oh, we'd leave them on a, dangling. Yeah.
Then you come back.
Yeah.
Did you prefer working for commercial TV as opposed to BBC?
No, the BBC was fine. The first series we did for the BBC was Beggar My Neighbour, which had Reg Varney, Peter Jones, June Whitfield and Pat Coombs. And during the course of that, it was directed by and produced by David Croft. During the course of that, Jimmy Perry came aboard.
Right.
And he played Reg Varney's foul brother. And about the second day of rehearsal, he brought a script for David to look at, which eventually became Dad's Army. So it was a sort of meeting of the people, as it were, who produced comedy for, goodness me, the next 2 or 3 decades.
Which we're still watching and
Indeed.
enjoying now.
Yeah.
You couldn't have had any idea at that time that this was the germ of something that would be, well, a massive icon in television history, British TV history.
No, not at the time, and the BBC was not all that sort of keen on it, and so on. But that quite often happens. One thing the BBC would always do then was work with you and allow you to make mistakes and allow you to get something right. So they didn't write it off immediately. I mean, commercial television, if it didn't get the figures on the first couple of shows, you knew you were heading for the exit.
Yeah, understandable commercial reasons, I guess.
Of course.
Especially in the days when they were building things up. Beggar My Neighbour, do any clips still exist of that? Do the programmes exist still?
Some do, but many have been lost because the BBC had a policy then of recording over shows. So they use the same tapes time and time again, and consequently a lot of our heritage has been lost. But of course we've still got the scripts, and occasionally somebody will phone up and say, I've got a copy of this show, and you think, goodness me, this is wonderful. Please send it to me immediately.
Were you able to retain any yourself as you went along, which you've then discovered actually no one else had?
No, because we couldn't afford the tape machines in those days because they were big tape machines and they were expensive.
Yeah.
I think the only person I knew who had one was Ray Galton and Simpson, Steptoe and Son, Hancock, etc. He had a machine, but he didn't record our shows. Why would he?
Did any of them go out live that you'd written?
Oh, some of them went out live, yes.
Yeah.
With an audience, which was great because it made the actors work hard. And you knew you succeeded if the audience laughed. Nowadays, I mean, a lot of people do shows and they haven't got an audience, so they don't know whether they're succeeding or not. They just hope they are. But that's the way it is.
Did they always laugh in the places you expected?
Sometimes, yes. Not
good.
always, not always. Sometimes they surprise you.
Yeah.
And that's what I like about the theatre. I mean, when you tour a show, each night is different. The laughs are in a different place. It can be the audience, it's raining outside, they're feeling a bit down, or it's sunny outside and they're feeling up.
You have a special connection with David Croft.
I do indeed, yes. He's my uncle.
Remarkable. You must have had some great memories from him then.
Oh yes, I mean my father was Peter Croft. He was a producer, director at Rediffusion, and David first of all went to TNT's, I think, and then back to the BBC. And yes, I mean as a child he was great. He sort of looked after my education at one point. He was a great guy, and much lost, sorely lost.
So in any sense, are you a chip off the old block?
Yes, I suppose so.
That's good to hear. I know that down the years, though, you have donated some materials to Kaleidoscope, the TV
Oh yes, I'm
preservation.
very keen on doing that.
Yeah, tell me about some of those.
Well, we've donated Jill Himes' scripts, etc. She wrote Tenko and so on. And we have donated other shows, and I hope in the future that we will gather together a lot of scripts that can come to Kaleidoscope. Because, I mean, they're important in the sense that television writing has changed. I mean, it's changed totally over the years. And the things that worked, 40 years ago don't necessarily work now. But for a student who's looking at television, this can be vital, I mean, to see how it is all worked and changed.
Why do you think things have changed then? In what ways mostly do you think is it more challenging to write for television these days than it was, or are people less willing to accept trial and error?
No, I think it's style. A lot of it is style. If you look at television today, it's quite fast cut. There's less time to relax between jokes or scenes, etc. We were lucky, we had longer to do things. I mean, we could take it easy. We could build up over a half hour. Now you've got to be in bang bang with a joke, etc. And quite often the joke isn't that funny because you haven't allowed the audience to grow to know the characters.
It's the character that's all important.
Oh,
isn't
very
it?
important.
And familiarity, I suppose.
Oh, yes,
things that we like
absolutely.
there are certain catchphrases, for example, that you're just waiting to hear every week. So presumably, sometimes you'd have to write these things in to a script, would you?
Well, you never know you've got a catchphrase until it becomes one. That surprises you. The most unlikely things become catchphrases. And, I mean, goodness, when they happen, it's wonderful. When you know you're on a winner.
That's gold.
Especially if you hear it in the street, great.
Yeah, yes. Give it a little warm glow.
Oh, it does, yeah.
Why did you then move to becoming an agent?
I became an agent. I'd been chairman of the Writers Guild of Great Britain, and we dealt with a lot of problems that writers had through agents. And I was sitting around a council table one day, and the full council was there, and I said, goodness me, I think I could do better than this. And not meaning it at all. And three of the writers there, who were quite prominent writers, said to me, well, if you do, Mike, we'll come with you. And I thought about it, and I then made the leap and took a lot of writers with me. And it's been great, because instead of working on one series a year or two series a year, I'm quite often involved in 7 or 8. So it's very fulfilling.
Does it still give you time to write as well, or you're totally occupied with being
well,
an agent?
mostly occupied. But I do write, and I quite often will, help with stage shows or, add some scenes to a TV or something like that, hopefully. But quite often I'm called in as a script doctor and things. It's, but I don't get a credit.
No.
That's okay.
So what is the work really that a lot of people may not know about what what a writer's agent does. We hear of theatrical agents and the like, but how do you support writers?
Oh, they need a lot of support.
Because it must be quite an insular world for the writer themselves working away, but are you like a support network as well?
Well, yeah, I mean, writers sometimes don't get out enough, and you need to encourage them and help them. And they know they can talk to me about a problem they may be having with their script, and I may be able to help because I've probably been there before. So that's always helpful. Mm. I wish I'd had that when I had an agent, but I didn't. You know, I mean, they were just in it for getting you the next job, which was fine, actually, nothing wrong with that. Mm. But sometimes you needed to settle down and discuss a scene that's not working, and especially if you're writing by yourself. If there's two of you writing, you work it out. Mm.
How often do you have to be brutally frank and say, this just doesn't work, it's not very good?
Well, you have to do it in a nice way. I've seldom sledgehammer anybody in that sort of sense, but you have to, if you know something just isn't working, you just got to call it a day.
Yeah.
Because it's waste of their time, and you know you're not going to be able to sell it, and it's just, you know, it's got something wrong with it.
Were the programmes that you and others were writing for, say back in the 60s, were there better programmes than they are today?
Well, they were different. I can't say they were better. They were just different.
Because often we have this view that, oh, it was great years ago.
But what was great about the golden age of comedy, which you're talking about, I guess, is...
I hesitate to use that phrase, golden age, because some people, you know, I might personally think it is, but a lot of people say the golden age is now.
Well, they could well say that. But the thing about then was that you could go in and see the head of Light Entertainment and say, hey, it was Frank Muir at that time, I think, hey, Frank, I've got an idea. What do you think of it? And you talk it through, and if he thought it was worth pursuing, he'd give you a comedy playhouse to pursue it, and you go away, write it, do it, and it will be done, and all in a relatively short time. Mm. Now you have to plough through committees, people, you know, just back on from media studies or something like that, who are giving you notes, and it's a very long way round of getting a show on, and quite often they end up being the guts being pulled out of them, and you end up with quite a flat show, which is, you know, the way it is.
What conflicts did you ever have with any broadcasters about who perhaps wanted to change what you'd written?
I did have a conflict. We were doing a pilot show, and we needed to do some more work on it, but they didn't give us time. And we did the pilot, it didn't really work. So they said, well, we'll come back and do another pilot. And when we went back in to discuss the other pilot, the new pilot, we had all these people in the room who then took the whole thing apart and took us apart. Mm. And as Ken and I walked out and we got down to the street, I said to Ken, no writer needs to be treated like that. I'm definitely going to be an agent. Mm. And have always defended writers in those sort of situations, as they need to be defended.
Yeah, quite. That sounds pretty rough.
Well, it was at the time, and but you get over these things.
Yeah, you have to.
No time at all.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. You mentioned Frank Muir. I mean, he and Dennis Norden were a writing partnership.
Oh, they were.
I mean, again, great.
Yeah.
Comedy.
Very tall.
Comedy writers. Both of them very tall.
Yes, and Galton and Simpson, very tall.
Really?
Yes.
That's okay.
People like me stood no chance to come up to the belt buckle, you know.
You got away with it, though, I think, didn't you, really? Yeah. But, I mean, great. That's why I think you can call it a golden age, because these characters really just produced such glorious entertainment for all of us, didn't they?
Oh, they did indeed. And I was lucky enough to, when Ken and I left the BBC, Frank Muir had given us an office at the BBC. He said, we went in one day, discussed an idea, and he said, look, go and sit down in this room and have a think about it. We sat down in the room, and 4 years later we hadn't left the room. I mean, you know, we went home, but we just took possession of the room. Yeah. And after I left that, I went to Associated London Scripts, which of course was Galton and Simpson and
Right.
Johnny Spate, Eric Sykes and Frankie Howden and so on. So it was a great, great, great place to work from.
What's your proudest achievement?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think I just like helping people. That may sound, you know, kind of
Oh, it's great.
naff, but no, I do. I like seeing things develop and come and get on screen, and it's lovely when it does. And you see people rewarded for it and looking happy.
Do you ever sit back and look back through any of your old scripts or your old work, or are you a person who that project is done and I'm moving?
No, I'm like an actor really, in the sense that the tape recorder's wiped when I finish the script. I don't go back to things.
Is it right then that we should watch old programmes back, well, or were they better wiped and we should move on?
No, I mean, if that was the case, you wouldn't be seeing Dad's Army 40 years after it was made. You wouldn't be seeing Heidi Ho and so on. So, no, it's not better that it's wiped. It's a whole new audience. They see it differently. I'm just talking about me. Once I've done it, I've done it.
Yeah, I understand that. Well, I mean, I'm glad that things weren't wiped because we wouldn't really have a programme here. Otherwise, which is kind of like the theme of what we're doing every week. But, you know, it's really, really good to see. There's so much more we could talk about. Particularly, I would love to have heard more about Reg Varney, actually, because so often people think of him from, you know, On the Buses, clearly. And that was a really, really good show. But great to know he'd done so much other stuff too.
Oh, he had. I mean, he's a great music hall performer. He had an act which he did, which was called Boxing, where he's just boxing by himself, and it was very, very funny, very physical.
Yeah.
And Reg was great for business. You know, he'd like to invent things, so we'd let him get on and invent them.
Yeah.
And be very glad when he had, and he gets a big laugh, and we take the credit. It's wonderful.
Well, it's been wonderful talking to you too, Mike. Thank you ever so much for your time today. That's really, really
indeed.
good.
It's been great.
That's it from another show. Hope you join us soon for another Long Lost Shows show.